All right, hey guys, I wanted to just kind of clarify a few things from the original video that I sent you guys the other day and add to it just a little bit because that's what we are going to be doing in class today. So a correction that I need to make from what you guys looked at the other day is I saw in the video that I sent you that I showed here in this corner for cultural borders that on the original video it was a subsequent border. However, this is really the term instead is consequent. It's a consequent border for our cultural border here in right here in India. Okay, the differences in the Muslims going to Pakistan and Bangladesh and Hindus moving to India. That is a consequent border because it's happening as a consequence of the cultural diversity and the conflict that happened there. So it's a consequent border to accommodate those ethnic differences. Okay, so change that, erase it if you can, or mark it out, whatever. Just make that term consequent, because the actual term subsequent belongs over here. And when I explained to Africa and all the different ethnic groups being in Africa, they had already figured out, who was going to be where. They had figured out the lines and the borders between each other before the Europeans even got there. The Africans had decided, you're going to stay on that side of the land and I'm going to stay over here, and this is where our border is going to be, before the Europeans even got there, right? That's why we drew all of our little circles to represent our ethnicities. Oh, I spelled that wrong right there. But to represent those ethnicities, and the agreements on the borders that had already been done there is called a subsequent border. So that's where the term subsequent comes in right here, is for when we're talking about how the different groups of people in Africa had already determined their borders. And a subsequent border just means that it's borders that are drawn after settlement. So opposite of antecedent. These are borders that are drawn because after the fact that people are already there. So the Africans were there, they had already decided where their borders were going to be naturally, they had talked about it, they had agreed on it, they had communicated about it, and that all happened obviously because the people were already there. So the lines were drawn after the fact, and that's a subsequent border. Okay? Everything I told you was right, and we had talked about that in class when you guys were gone. Few more things that we added the other day was up here in Europe. Two more vocab terms that we had talked about were open borders here in Europe. And what I talked about with that was really just the fact that Europe is open. I know a lot of people have traveled to Europe. Remember, I lived in Europe for 6 months. And it was super easy to get around. I would get on a train and just go really honestly anywhere in Europe. I went to 15 different countries when I lived in Europe, but I only have a handful of stamps in my passport because the borders are open. Okay, so it's kind of like what we have here in the US, right? We can get in the car, we can drive to Oklahoma, we can drive to Louisiana, whatever, and without any problem, right? We can just cross those borders freely. Well, Europe kind of did the same thing. They wanted that same type of mindset in Europe with open borders. That means people and goods can travel and cross those borders without any trouble, really. Okay, and so those borders are open. And then the last one that we talked about was relic borders. Okay, so I kind of drew ugly where Germany was, and that star right there represents the Berlin Wall. Okay, so the Berlin Wall is a good example of a relic border, because a relic border is a border that is still visible on the landscape even though it's not an actual border anymore. So the Berlin Wall divided really East and West Berlin, right? It was the only place that had a physical border between East and West Europe and East Europe and Western Europe. Okay, after World War II, you had the Iron Curtain, and it was this division between the communist East and the capitalist West. Okay, and the only place that really had a definite built border, defined border, I guess, was in Berlin with the Berlin Wall. Okay, so it was up for a long time, but in 1989, it came down with the fall of communism and all of that. So when the Berlin Wall came down, it didn't come all the way down. There's still parts of it that are still up today. In Berlin, it might be, knee high or waist high in certain places throughout the city to kind of remember that. So it was kind of left behind, and that's what remnant means. Okay, this term remnant means it's just left behind, and so it's something that was left behind of a previous border. So that was a border. It was an actual border back in the day, but it's not a real border anymore, but you can still see it there. So that's what we call a relic border. Okay. So that's all we did on the map the other day. And then we talked about how we establish boundaries. Okay, so after thinking about all of these different borders, there are 4 different ways that you have to establish boundaries. Okay, the first being you have to define the border. Okay, so think like at the end of a war, right? You have 2 countries that have just been fighting or whatever, and they have to figure out what the new borders are going to be between the countries. Okay, so you have to define them, and that's going to happen through treaties and documents. Okay, so both parties have to come to the table, sit down, write it out, put it on paper, and agree that this is where the boundary is going to be. Okay. The second part to it is after those boundaries are decided on and they're written down on a document, then you have to call in a cartographer, which is someone who draws maps, right? So once that border is determined, then you have to draw it out. Someone has to draw it on a map to show that this new difference, the new border is there. And then once that happens, you have to demarcate it. Well, you don't have to. Some countries choose to demarcate their borders, which really just means they make it visible, that border visible on the landscape. They make it visible on the land, okay? So that can be anything from like welcome signs. You can cross the border into Oklahoma. It says, welcome to the state of Oklahoma, right? They have it in like every state. So it could be as simple as a sign just saying like, hey, look, you're in a new place. Or it could be bigger and more dramatic like walls or fences, right? The West Bank wall that we looked at before Thanksgiving or right around Thanksgiving with the Israelis and the Palestinians, right? They had a wall to keep the Palestinians in and not let them go anywhere. That's a demarcation. It could also be fences. There's a fence that separates North and South Korea on the 38th parallel. So that fence is also a demarcation, keeps people in and out, right? So it's really just something that's visible on the land. That's a demarcation. The last thing is that you have to figure out how you're going to administer the border. Really, that just means how are you going to maintain it? How are people and money and goods going to go from one country to the next country? So is it going to be like a checkpoint? Do you have to go through a checkpoint and show or prove what you're bringing in and out of the country? Or is it going to be open access like it is in Europe, where it doesn't matter if you go across countries, they don't really care about it, or it's just open, it's free. We have to think about what we bring in and out of the country. Like when you go to the airport and you leave the country, you come back into the country, you have to fill out like a customs and immigration form, because the country has to know what you're bringing in and out of the country. If it's like, something more than just like souvenirs or something from a country, you have to let the government know what you're bringing in and out. So you have to figure out who's going to administer that and who's going to control what's coming in and out of the countries. Okay, so that's really all we talked about the other day. All right, so what we're adding today, it's going to be super quick. We just need to talk about 2 different things that we can put on this map. And we are going to talk about the law of the sea, which is something that you will read about in this unit. And so since we haven't really given much love down here to South America, that's where we're going to draw this out, okay? So law of the sea is where we're at over here. And so really the law of the sea applies to any place that has a coastline, okay? Anywhere that has a water border, is the law of the sea is going to apply there, okay? It really just determines how far out, like, your power, your sovereignty is going to go, like, from your coast. And so there's kind of a couple of different, like, steps or tiers, kind of, to show just how much power you have the further you go away from your, like, coastline, okay? So the first, like, zone, I guess you could call it, is the first 12 miles out, okay? So I'm going to draw a little arrow there. So the first 12 miles out is called the territorial waters. How do I spell territorial? 2 R's. Territorial waters. Okay, so this just means that these first 12 miles out into the ocean, it means that it functions as if it's like on land. So they have complete power over that 12 miles, and any laws that are in that country will apply completely for these first 12 miles out into the water, okay? So, like, for example, like, think like drinking and driving, right? It's illegal to drink and drive in this country, so then clearly you can't drink and drive, like, on a boat within these first 12 miles, or, like, you're breaking the law. And the country, like this country right here is Peru, that country has the rights to like punish you, and according to their laws, okay? So they have complete control there. All right. The next 12 miles is our next little zone here. Okay, so another arrow out. The next 12 miles is called the contiguous zone. Okay, contiguous, C-O-N, contiguous. Yeah. Zone. That's how you spell it. Okay. The contiguous zone. And this zone is a little bit less power, okay, than the first 12 miles. So they still have control, but not as much as the first 12 that we wrote down, okay? So here you can have different laws, mostly about, like, pollution. So it's like you can't just drive out in a boat 20 miles and like dump your trash there. Like, Peru would still have the rights to control that. They can also have laws about taxation. So, like, if big cargo ships or whatever are shipping in, or around your country, if they go within these first 24 miles through the contiguous zone, then that country has the rights to tax that different stuff. They could tax the goods, and, like, customs and immigration applies there as well. So they're subject to Peru's laws when it comes to that, okay? Then the last one we have goes all the way out 200 miles, okay? So it's 200 miles total, not like 200 plus the 24 here. It's 200 miles total, and this is called the exclusive economic zone. Exclusive economic zone, or otherwise known as the EEZ. Okay, so this is in total 200 miles out. So what this means is that really whatever lies in the ocean 200 miles out into your, like, off of your coastline, whatever resources are there is your country, okay, is yours. So if it's fish, if it's oil, if it's natural gas, so whatever is out in that water and you can make money off of is yours for that country, okay? So everything outside of Peru here, I should probably label that so that we know this is Peru. Everything out in the waters 200 miles is Peru's, okay? Anything they can make money off of, they can. And it belongs to Peru. It's not like, Chile, which is right here. Chile can't just, like, come in right there and take it, okay? Not how it works at all. So it's really economic, which is in the name, exclusive economic zone. Economics, right? How we make money. So that's easy to remember there. Really, anything that can benefit economically for that country out in the water 200 miles is then theirs. Okay. All right, and the last thing that we are going to cover today, just really quickly, is this thing called choke points. So it's really kind of like what it sounds like, is something being choked off. All right. So choke points are just really skinny, like passageways that you could easily choke off and not let anyone through. And we're thinking about water here, really. Okay, so I am going to only label one, but I'll draw my circles elsewhere. So I want you to find this very narrow waterway right here between the Arabian Peninsula and Iran is over here. Okay, but this is a really good example of a choke point. So I want you to label that. That's a choke point, and this is the only one that we're going to specifically label. This is the Strait of Hormuz. Hormuz. Okay, the Strait of Hormuz. So this is really, really important because the Middle East has a lot of what? Oil, right? So all of the oil that is right there is really important to the rest of the world, right? And Saudi Arabia and Iran, honestly, they have a lot of oil. And so how the oil gets to the rest of the world is truly through this little bitty narrow passageway of water. Okay, they load up all of the oil on the big tanker, on the cargo ships, right, and they travel out through to the rest of the world right there. Okay, so if someone got mad at each other, like Saudi Arabia and Iran honestly don't like each other a whole lot, so sometimes they threaten each other by like threatening to choke off that strait right there, to where they wouldn't let the oil get out to the rest of the world, and they often threaten to block that off, and so that could be obviously really detrimental to the rest of the world. And so oftentimes we the U.S. and other powerful countries in the world have some sort of military presence in this part of the world, just because we're worried that at some point, if that eventually were to ever get cut off, then we would really be up a creek. So a lot of times people have their eye on this part of the world and this choke point, just because it is super important to have access to all of that oil and that supply. Okay. So that one's really important. Another one that is sometimes dangerous is this one right here between Somalia and Yemen. It's called the Bab el-Mandeb. It's pretty dangerous. There's Somalia pirates and stuff, and they will take you for ransom. There's a movie made about it a couple years ago with Tom Hanks about these pirates. Not like Pirates of the Caribbean, but think like more dangerous, okay? And sometimes they will try to block off that choke point, and they kind of man that a little bit there. Another one is the Suez Canal. It doesn't look like there's water there, but there's a canal that links the Red Sea right there to the Mediterranean, and they make it pretty easy for boats like we were talking about earlier, like the oil ships to leave from Saudi Arabia, go through the Strait of Hormuz, and then hit all of these other straits actually, but they can go this way up through the Suez Canal and get to Europe pretty easily that way. But the Suez Canal is important there, and the canal is actually man-made right there. Another one is the Strait of Gibraltar right there between Spain and Africa. It looks like they almost touch right there. And then another one over here that's also pretty not contested, but pretty dangerous is right here where Malaysia and Indonesia touch. So again, think about how trading happens, and all these big cargo ships get around everywhere from the Middle East, from South Asia, right? Anywhere in this area, if you're trying to get to Asia, the quickest way is going to be to go through this choke point right here between Indonesia and Malaysia to get to Asia or to get to the U.S., right? That's a pretty quick trip right there. But that Strait of Malacca is super dangerous. So again, lots of pirates right there, but very dangerous, and heavily kind of guarded, honestly, by the pirates. So pretty dangerous right there. But again, narrow passageway, but also super important for ships to get in and out right there. Okay. So that's it. Those are my examples for choke point. We talked about law of the sea. So your map is, oh, what did I do? Oh, here we go. So your map is finished at this point. Just make those adjustments from the first video that I missed the other day. Add the law of the sea and the choke points, and your map is done. So take a picture of this and put it on your Padlet.